Hello, this is Craig Mertens, Director of Product Education for Inktober, the parent company of GraphicsFlow, Inksoft, Printavo, and now SignTracker. Welcome to our GraphicsFlow Academy webinar today. We are going to be talking about weathered overlays, and you will be the first people on this webinar to see the new weathered overlay feature in GraphicsFlow. So what is a weathered overlay? That's probably the perfect place to start. A weathered overlay is a text effect that we place over the top of a graphic. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And in the olden days, you would have to take a screen printed t-shirt and wash it 100 times to get this effect. But now we can replicate this effect digitally. And that's what this new feature in GraphicsFlow is all about. So you see I've logged into my GraphicsFlow account. I'm just going to click on a file that has an overlay in it. This is the new design drop for December. Design drop. And by the way, this file right here, this is actually vector. It's designed to look like that pixelated Mario Brothers look from my era, the 80s. So it's not a bitmap graphic, it's actually a vector graphic. But if I click on this graphic right here, you can see it has that weathered effect that's built in to the graphic. And that's what creates the overlay. And typically, those are created one of two ways. They're created utilizing a bitmap file that rests over the top, or in some cases, a vector file. And when we create these, we do some pretty innovative things when we create these overlays. We shoot organic objects with a high resolution digital camera. Then we take that file and we actually bring it into Photoshop and we convert these into 1-bit bitmaps. That's basically a 1-bit bitmap. A 1-bit bitmap has two properties. It is black and it is white. And one of the unique properties of a program like Adobe Illustrator or CorelDRAW is if you have a 1-bit bitmap, you can assign colors to the black portion and the white portion. So the black portion becomes the outline color and the white portion becomes the fill color. And you can actually adjust that. And the only way you can do that is if that bitmap is a 1-bit black and white. It's just a property of that type of bitmap in Illustrator, CorelDRAW. And so when we created this graphic, we just have this bitmap sitting over the top of the graphic, and that's what's creating the weathered effect. And the weathered effect, instead of having to wash the shirt 100 times, is something that's built into the graphic. And I'm of the opinion that weather effects, it's a little bit like cheating in a sense. A lot of graphics just look better with weathered effects, especially like collegiate things. It breaks up that solid feel. It does have that kind of nostalgic retro look to it. And I notice I follow a lot of the brands in the sports space. And I also follow a lot of the resort brands. I'm the kind of person, if I go into a gift shop, I'm always looking at the t-shirt graphics. And it hasn't gone anywhere. These weathered overlay effects have been around a long time, but they haven't gone anywhere. They seem to be here for good. And it is a way to take maybe a kind of a boring, little bit of a mediocre graphic and give it a little bit of extra visual value. And I'm actually kind of a big fan. And I notice, like, if I look through my wardrobe, I have a fairly significant amount of designs in my personal wardrobe that have weathered effects on them. And also bear in mind, these don't have to be limited just to apparel graphics. They look great on banners. They look great on promotional products. I've seen people utilize these kind of weather graphics on things like in the nature of awards. So there's a lot of versatility to the weather graphic. But let me kind of show you, some of the challenges with weathered effects, and then this will kind of illustrate the point and why we had a need to add this feature. So if I scroll down here and I find a graphic, and let's say this graphic right here. When we created this graphic, we created a weathered effect, created that 1-bit bitmap, and then when we concluded the graphic, what we did as the very last step is we placed the bitmap over the top of the graphic. And the bitmap's in the form of a square or rectangle, so it's actually going outside these boundaries. If I go to click on Customize, you're going to notice a couple changes in GraphicsFlow immediately. They're not going to be super obvious to you, but you should be able to notice them right away. Number one, you have a new way to preview the background. So you have a light, dark preview. So if you have white in the graphic, or maybe you're not sure it's white, you can now just shuttle the view onto a view that's light or dark. So that's the first thing. Prior to the update, in the previous version of GraphicsFlow, the weathered overlay or any element of a design template that had a bitmap in it that was formed by pixels would not be viewable. And so what we did is we now are able to view those elements, and we're able to change the preview so you can kind of see what's going on. and we can turn them on or off. So if you're one of these people and you're maybe just doing solid color screen printing, or maybe you're going to use this graphic as the basis for doing an embroidery design or a patch or an applique, you no longer have to take it into a CorelDRAW or an Adobe Illustrator or whatever graphics program you're using. Maybe you're using a freeware program like Inkscape or Affinity Designer. You don't have to bring these files into that program any longer to turn off the overlay. And to me, that's important because we do have clients that have no professional graphics software whatsoever. They just don't. And so something as simple as deleting the overlay is problematic for them. With that being said, there's a very good freeware program on the market if you don't have a pro graphics program called Inkscape, and it's available for both Mac and Windows. I even have some videos on the GraphicsFlow website showing you how to utilize Inkscape. If you don't have a pro graphics program like CorelDRAW or Illustrator and you just want to have the ability to edit vector graphics, Inkscape is a pretty awesome little program, kind of a synthesis between CorelDRAW and Illustrator. It doesn't do all the things that those programs can do. But one of the disadvantages of it, it can't edit the live text in our files. If I download this as an Illustrator file, I can edit live text in Illustrator. And same thing if I download the CorelDRAW file, I can do that. But if I just want to delete an overlay or do some simple recoloring, Inkscape's pretty terrific for that. I have my file here and I have my weathered overlay and I can turn it on or off. So I've got it currently turned off. And when I download this file, the weathered overlay is not going to be there. So that's the general concept of how weathered overlays work. You just have to remember, if you click on customize, now you're going to be able to view that overlay. From my experience, it is much easier to work with modifying templates in the customizer than it is in CorelDRAW by itself, Illustrator by itself, or even CorelDRAW using the Smart Designer add-on software. Some of the things that we kind of take for granted is global color swapping. All the colors in the design are listed right here. So if I want to swap that out to a natural color, I don't have to select anything. I can just do that. And that's a pretty handy little thing. And then also like merging colors. If I want to take all of the, this particular color right here, this gray, and merge it into the off-white color, I guess it's kind of a natural color, I can do that quite a bit easier than what it would take to do that in Corel Illustrator, even Smart Designer working within Corel. That's a pretty key point. And also you can swap out clip art, change the text, all of those same things. And I had a client yesterday that was saying, hey, how do I edit these files in my sign program? I'm like, you don't need to. What you can do is just edit the files in the stock art customizer and then download a PDF file. And then you can edit to your heart's content the vectors in your sign program. Now, because we have clients that use programs like FlexiSign or SignLab that don't open Adobe Illustrator files or CorelDRAW files, but they do a great job of opening a PDF file. What do I do with this file from here in terms of production? It's actually a pretty important thing. What I want to talk about next is I want to talk about the side of this graphic that is going to be needed to output to a device, because as these are right now, these are not really production ready to go to a device. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, if I go over here and turn on the background view, you can see the overlays actually overlapping that. That will print. It's not knocking through the graphic. It's sitting on top of the graphic. That's problem number one. And then the second problem that we're going to have is we have an issue with the fact that maybe there's white in this graphic as well. So what I'm going to do here with this particular graphic, I'm going to take the overlay itself and I'm actually going to recolor it to a different color. This is something that we can do now with using the new functionality for editing overlays. So I have an edit bucket right here, and I could go in and replace this overlay with a different overlay. We'll come back and do that with a different graphic a little bit later on. But I also have the ability to do some coloring on this. So right now I've colorized this, and I'm going to turn that back to its original color. So I have quite a bit of latitude in terms of editing of this file. So now we have the overlays back to kind of its white form, and then the color in the graphic is now set up as kind of an off-white. So looks pretty good. So why do I want to do that? Because if I'm going to use CorelDRAW to set this up for production, I need to be able to knock that color out in CorelDRAW. And if it's the same color white, when I go to knock out the overlay, it will also knock out the white in the graphic. So I might want to be able to use the white in the graphic in my print. On the other hand, I might want to just have the white in the graphic knockout as well. Do a fair amount of latitude on that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to save this design. And by the way, I can reposition the overlay if I choose to. So if I want to go over here, on the overlay and, make it bigger or smaller. I might have the latitude to do that. And obviously, if we make the overlay bigger, it's going to make the dots in the overlay larger. So it's going to be not as fine a detail. So if I wanted to adjust that, I would just go over here to size. And if I wanted to nudge it over, I could go over here to size 2 and nudge it over as well. So I have the latitude to do that. What I want to do is I just want to save the design. So I'm just going to save it. And I created a folder in GraphicsFlow that is overlay samples, I believe. There's overlay samples. Let's name it, and we'll call it Weston's 02, because I already have an 01. And so that file is now saved. And then I'm going to download a production file here. Something very important. If I was just creating a social media campaign and I wanted to have just like a bitmap preview of this file, if I download a PNG file right here, what's going to happen is you're still going to get that white bounding area of the overlay around it. So if you really want to knock that overlay out, you are going to have to still bring that into a pro graphics program, which is what we're going to do right now. First thing I'm going to do is save this as a PDF file. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I will save it as a CDR file. So the PDF file can really pretty much go into any graphics program. It could go into Adobe Illustrator. It could go into Affinity Designer. It could go into Inkscape, any program capable of editing a vector file. The CDR file is native to CorelDRAW and is just going to be used with the newer versions of CorelDRAW. So we'll save those two files, and then we'll go into Illustrator first. Illustrator, if you're new to graphics, Illustrator is going to be a little more challenging. It's a fairly complex program, but one of the things that it can handle quite well is these weathered overlays. And it has a feature which I believe is superior to CorelDRAW, which is a masking feature that will allow you to mask out bitmaps into vector graphics. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. So right now, if I grab the selection tool and I move it, you can see there's the weathered overlay right over there. What I really want to do is select the entire graphic, select all, Control A, and there's a little feature in Illustrator. It says opacity. I'd click on opacity. I'd click on make mask. And then what I need to do is uncheck clip and then check invert mask. And now the overlay is actually punched through the vector graphic. And that's pretty handy. And the reason that's handy for a couple of reasons. Number one is if I save this as a PDF or even a PNG file, it'll have a transparent background. So if I go over here and I'm in Illustrator and I export this as a PNG file, and I'll just put it in my downloads folder here. I'll just export that. If I was creating say a virtual sample, like say in my Inksoft store or my Printavo quotations or whatever program that I happen to be using, this PNG version has the background knocked out. So if I put this on a substrate and that substrate is dark, you can see the color coming through. So that's actually a very important consideration. And I save this as a vector file like a PDF, we're going to get the same thing going on, except the underlying file is still going to be a vector. And it's kind of like a hybrid file. The color is literally like punching through. So it's a little bit different. So let's actually save this as a PDF so you can see what I'm talking about. So in Illustrator, if I go to save as, I can check the format. Instead of saving it as a Illustrator file, I'm going to save it as a PDF, and I'll just open that up in Microsoft Edge. So we still have the overlay file here. Let's drag and drop that into CorelDRAW and see what's going on with the file here. It's kind of like a hybrid between a vector and a bitmap now. From a production point of view, better file to send out, in this case, would actually be a high resolution PNG file. 600 DPI would be more than adequate for any kind of printing. And so if you were sending this off to, like, say, Supacolor to have a direct-to-film transfer, 600 DPI or even a 300 DPI PNG file would be the recommended format that I would send. I would not send a PDF file because the way that masking is set up in Adobe Illustrator, it could look completely different when we bring that into another program. Let's open that up in Inkscape. Same issues. It looks like that bitmap is actually like a layer that's sitting in front of the vectors. For production purposes, if you're going to create that masking effect, do it as a PNG file out of Illustrator. That's the way to do it. And honestly, it's really the way to do it out of Corel too. And we'll we'll kind of go the other way. We'll get out of Inkscape here and we'll go back into Corel and we'll open up the exact same file. We'll see what's going on there. So we're going to go down here. I think we called it Weston 02, if I'm not mistaken. There we are. So when this file came into CorelDRAW, you can see that the overlay is still sitting on the top, and I am going to change the background color here. And I'm just going to double click on my gray little shadow effect here, go to background, and I'm going to give it a pretty high contrast color. We'll just do red here. So you can kind of see what's going on. So you can certainly see that bitmap overlay. Now in Corel, you do have the ability to use what's called power clipping, and there's some pros and cons to it. I'm going to move the overlay over here. And if you're going to do that, you want to group the entire file. In order for the power clip to go into the entire graphic, the entire file has to be grouped. So I'm going to go over here and group it. And then I'm going to click on the overlay. If you go to wireframe view, by the way, sometimes it's a little bit easier to see the overlay, but also if I just double clicked on my pick tool, everything would select and I can see, oh, there's definitely something sitting over here. So I'm going to grab my right mouse button and I'm going to push down on my right mouse button and I'm going to hover the graphic over the top and then I'm going to release it and I'm going to get an option for power clip. So it's similar to Adobe Illustrator. It's creating a mask of the graphic, but it's only going into the portion that's the vector. And you can edit this. So if you want to come in here and say edit power clip and you want to move it around, or even, I could duplicate it in here if I wanted to create another version of it. So I'm going to right click and duplicate it. And then I'm going to go and click on it, get a control handle and go over here and move that around. And I'm going to actually go and left click on this to make this yellow. I'm making it a separate color, and I'll show you why I'm going to do that in a second. You have quite a bit of editing level control here. So there we go. And then when we're done doing that, we're going to hit finish. The reason I did that is I want to use a separate color from a color that's in the graphic. I would really only do that if there was white in the graphic. That'd really be the only purpose of doing that, because I don't want to knock the white out. I want to keep the white in the graphic. A lot of times you probably do want to knock the white out and have the overlay effect and the white knocked out on this, because then it would be a one color design, save you a little bit of ink, and frankly, I think it'll look better. Let's go ahead and mask out the yellow. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to bitmaps and I'm going to convert this to a bitmap, and I'll do it at 600 DPI. It doesn't matter if it's CMYK or RGB. When it came out of GraphicsFlow, this particular file came out down as a Pantone color, which is actually an RGB color. If you're sending your files into any manufacturer that's making direct-to-film transfers, they more than likely want you to have CMYK colors. You can see a shift in colors when you convert to CMYK from RGB, because the CMYK color gamut isn't as large. And so sometimes you'll see a shift, but we'll convert it to CMYK. And I'm going to leave on this checkbox for anti-aliasing and this checkbox for transparent background. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that on there. Now this file is no longer a vector. It's being converted into a bitmap file. And let's go to wireframe view, and you can clearly see it's a bitmap file. And so what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a feature called bitmap color mask to knock that yellow through. And the reason I made it yellow, it's just kind of easier to see it and creates a little bit of contrast, but also it's a different color than maybe the white that would be in the graphic. I don't have white in this particular graphic, but if I did have white in that graphic, I'd absolutely want to use a different color. We've got this file here. We have converted this to a bitmap. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the bitmap color mask feature. And if you just go to bitmaps in Corel and click on bitmap mask, you'll see it. You have a little dropper here. You can take that dropper. I just want to isolate some of the yellow area right there. I just want to get that yellow area. I'm just going to click on that. And then I want to make sure the graphic is selected. And then I'm going to click on, we'll move this little slider over here, hide selected, apply. And we'll get a little warning message. And now you can clearly see that the red is coming through. Now it created a bounding box around the perimeter of this. So now we have to knock the bounding box over. And in order to do that, I actually have to convert it to a bitmap one more time. And then what I need to do is grab the little dropper, click on the white and hit apply here again. And now it's completely knocked through. Do you guys see that? So if I move it over here, you can see it's knocked through. So this is doing exactly the same thing as Illustrator, making that PNG file. Let's delete that background. page background, not an object. So I'm just going to go to background and background. And then again, I'm just going to export this as a PNG file. And we'll call this C right here, export. And we'll just open it up. Here it is. Same exact thing as we did in Illustrator. Exactly. Let's knock through. This is going to print great. Let's talk a little bit about the production side. On a device, let's say it's direct-to-garment printer. Direct-to-garment printer is spraying down and laying down ink. So if this was going on a dark substrate, it can do very tight, fine registration. The challenge is when you have tiny little dots in the overlay, sometimes the ink will kind of spread out a little bit and it'll bleed away and the dots start to fill in. I think that's okay that the tiny dots fill in. Overlays are kind of organic in nature. They don't have to look exactly the same from shirt to shirt or from object to object. But if you have tiny little dots in the overlay, sometimes they can't fill in because of the spreading of the ink. That's very problematic for direct to film transfers. So in a direct to film transfer, using an overlay with such a fine grain like this, it's just the process isn't going to enable you to do that because they're printing white over the top of the color transfers. That's the last thing that's going on. Or if they're doing a digital offset printing process like what CipaColor does, they're actually using plates to print the color and then they're screen printing the white. So you just can't get the perfect little registration and it's going to create problems. Now, a company like CipaColor is going to fix that on their end. I think you'd be more inclined to do is maybe use an overlay that's like a little bit bigger, that doesn't have such tiny dots. That would certainly be helpful, but that's somewhat problematic. It's also true of screen printing because you have what's called dot loss and dot gain in screen printing. And if you have too tiny of an object, when you push the ink through the screen, it just fills in those holes and you get what's called dot loss. And that's problematic as well. For sublimation, you just print this. Sublimation printers are amazing for doing overlays. And you can just print this. Bear in mind, you're not going to be doing it on a dark substrate, but you can just print this and you just don't really even have to worry about it. You do have to be conscientious about your overlays. Anytime you're laying white underneath the color, and that would factor into direct-to-garment, it would factor into direct-to-film, and it would certainly factor into screen printing. Possibly using a different overlay might be a better choice. It just depends on your process. Now, good news is we have lots of different overlays in GraphicsFlow. You now have the ability, if you choose to, inside of GraphicsFlow to actually replace this overlay. Now we have this file, but I want to replace the overlay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here where it says Edit next to the overlay. I'm going to select Edit, and I'm going to select Replace Clip Art. Now, again, I can change the shuttle, the preview, so I can really see the overlay there. So I'm going to replace it. And guess what I'm going to type in to find an overlay? How about the word overlay? So I'm going to come over here and pull up a new overlay, and maybe I want to do, like this paint splatter thing that's going on in here. Or, we've got quite a few of them in here. So let's do this one right here. So now we're replacing the existing overlay with this one. Now, bear in mind, it's going to come in colored, so we need to recolor it. So I'm going to hit Apply. And then where the coloring is, I'm just going to go back and I'm going to color this in to the white, which is the same color that's in the graphic. So now I've colored it in as white. We have our overlay. Now, bear in mind, I'm going to turn on the dark preview. You still see that blob there, so it's still sitting over the top. But I'm going to click on Apply now to apply that. And then, we can just save the changes here. I'll just save this, and I'm going to not choose to update the original. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as a new customized design. Now I have two versions. I have the Weston's version and I have the Martin's version. So I got a big head start. Martin's version is a little bit more customized because Martin's version now has its own little paint splatter overlay, so I'm going to save this as a new customized design. And then I'm going to download this as Martin's 02. And we will click on Save Design. And then I'll download either a PDF if I'm going into Illustrator, CDR if we're going into Corel. This overlay is actually vector based. And that's interesting. And from a production point of view of like direct to film or DTG or even to a certain degree screen printing, this would actually be, I think, preferred because it's got some bigger objects in it. There's some tiny objects in there, but they're just going to fill in when you do the printing part. So same drill. I'm going to group this. Control G, group it. I'm going to go over here and power clip this in. This one, it'll be easy to color it because it's already vector, so I can just click on any old color. And same maneuver. I'm just going to click on it, drag it, position it, power clip it in. Potentially, maybe I want to have all the color knocked through, the white as well as the portion of the graphic that is this blue. If that was the case, what I would want to do is just click on this and just say edit. So I'm going to edit the contents. I'm going to click on this object, and I'm actually going to make it the same color, which is white, and I'm going to hit finish. And I'll show you kind of the next step. So I go over here, select it, and convert it to that same bitmap. I'll do 600 DPI. We'll click on it, and I'm just going to double click on the rectangle here to create an object behind here, kind of a way to cheat, not have to put an actual background in there. And I'm going to click on the dropper. I'm going to click on any of the white areas, and then I'm going to select the white. I'm going to select the whole graphic, whole thing, hit apply, and now the entire thing's coming through. For screen printing, it's a little bit easier because for screen printing, we'll go back to the original file. So for screen printing, I'll just go ahead and take the weathered effect over here. We'll move that over there. And I'm just going to make this, again, right-click on it to make it a different color. And the entire red area here, we'd want that whole red area to be a spot color. So we'd want to use a Pantone color to recolor it. When we print film, all we're going to do is just ignore the yellow layer. That's all we have to do. So if we go to color, separations, we'll click on a little preview window here. When we go to print the separations, just don't print the yellow one. You'll have your little color list and just turn it off. And it works the same way in Illustrator. Don't print that separations. There's a few designs that were always problematic in GraphicsFlow because they have bitmap clip art, or the portion of the graphic is actually a bitmap versus being a vector. There's a few graphics that are like that. And there's one that if I just go to design ideas, I know how to get to this one. If you just click on Wolf here, and you click on this, people would open this file in this particular version of it. This one right here, this is all vector right over here. This is all vector right over here too, but this version of it has a bitmap. This whole thing is a bitmap. It's not a lot of files like that. There's probably, less than 100. In the past, you couldn't delete it or replace it. It just wouldn't get recognized. In the way that we've done the new feature, you can just replace this with another piece of clip art. I'll just go to replace. We'll get another wolf. So we'll swap that out, maybe make that a little bit smaller. Looks pretty good. And then maybe consolidate the colors up a little bit. So I'm going to reassign the blue here, the other blue. And do you have to do that? Not really. If you're doing a digital print, you don't really have to do that. But I think in the interest of just production readiness and maybe making the file a little bit more adaptable to screen printing, that wouldn't be a bad idea. Now, this version of the file has this blend in here as well. We're pretty excited about the feature. I think a nice little touch here is this, being able to change the background out just to a darker background so you can see some contrast. I think that's pretty handy in there. And the other thing too is I think most folks didn't know that there are those overlays within the file. And if you want to swap out a weathered overlay, you certainly have the latitude to do that. So let's go and just do a spirit lore category here. And we'll see if we can find another one. Yeah, here's one. And let's go to customize. Here's your overlay right here. And again, just to recap, turn it off. If you don't want it, you don't have to have it. If you want to make it a different color because you're going to mask it out in Illustrator or CorelDRAW, then you can go colorize that layer. Just go and make it maybe an off-white. It is separated out as a different color when you go into Illustrator. It's got enough contrast that you can kind of see that it's not white. So again, why did I do that? So I can keep the white in the graphic when I mask it out, because the overlay color is now different than a color in the graphic. There is the new overlays feature to GraphicsFlow. This will be live in your account. So thank you guys so much for attending the webinar.